Hi, I'm Reed.
And I'm Florence, and we partnered up with Durex to dive into the existing problems around masculinity.
In this episode, we talk about what it means to be a man, including toxic masculinity and the challenges men face today.
And for that, we've come to see an inspiring coach. Ben, you work with unpacking some of these really big stereotypes surrounding men and masculinity.
Yeah. So I work for an organisation called the Good Lad Initiative, plug, who do gender equality work with men and boys in schools and universities and corporates. But it's a really fun job. So we go into like schools and we chat to kids about masculinity. And then we go into universities and talk to young guys about masculinity and what it's like to be a guy in that environment. And then we do the same stuff in corporates with
amazing.
like older dudes. Yeah, it's fun.
You hear a lot about consent revolving around women, but even though that's a really important conversation to have, we don't really talk about men and consent.
We never talk about consent for guys. Do you know what? It wasn't till I was like deep into my 20s that I realised that consent was something that I could give. And I think the conversation, like almost all of the kids we speak to have no idea that they're allowed to give consent. And consent is always like posed in our society as something that we get from women. Something that women hold, and sex is like a transaction usually between a guy and a woman, where like the guy asks and the woman says yes, and then sex happens, or he does sex to her, which is like a super weird, right? What we probably need to get to is a space where like guys are able to give consent. Because I know even for me as an adult, like I feel like it's super weird to say no to sex. Like if someone wants to have sex, I feel pressure to like always want to do it.
Imagine it as a teen.
Because there is the stereotype that guys want to have sex all the time.
Right.
And if you're feeling like you don't want to have sex, then it must just be like, but I'm supposed to.
Your excuses are limited, but I think there's something about like just learning to communicate what you actually want. And I read something really interesting the other day actually that was saying that men really struggle to identify what makes a good sexual experience. Whereas women have like a long list of like, oh, it was painful, or it was uncomfortable, or I didn't feel safe, or whatever it might be. All of those things equal bad sex. For guys, like it's like, who knows? Like if you come, then it's probably good. And I think that's also super weird because sex is so much deeper than that, right? Like it's like connection and like shared experience. And also the way we as guys talk about sex is often like just a one-way thing rather than something that you actually did with another person.
The conversation isn't really being had about sex and consent with guys and their friends.
No, not at all. Never with our friends. Even when you talk to your friends about sex, you're usually talking about how many people you've had sex with or what you did, but never about like how enjoyable it was or what it felt like or what was good or what was bad. So I think there's a lot of stuff to consider there and we need to like get better language around it.
So why do you think guys need to be told and to be talked about this?
Do you know what? It's actually, I don't think anybody thinks about it unless they're forced to think about it. Like we do an activity at the start of one of our workshops, which is called Gender Stories. One of the questions is, when was the first time you realised your gender? And the reaction is always super weird because no one knows. Like no, especially for men, like by and large, they generally haven't realised their gender. Like they obviously know that they're men or male, but they've just never thought about it and they can't like recall a moment. And I know like for me, mine was when I was like 8 years old or something, and me and my sister were walking to my grand's house. She was like, turn your feet out, boys don't walk with their feet turned in. Which wasn't super aggressive. It was cool, but like I just remember, and I don't have bad feelings about it, I just remember that being the first time I thought, oh, I'm different to you. You're a girl and I'm not. And obviously it would have been before that because like you get split into boys and girls lines in schools and stuff. But yeah, I think guys especially don't have many conversations around masculinity. And it always feels like you just exist within this thing without defining what it is or making any decisions about what you like or don't like about it. In a lot of ways, it can be really damaging and really harmful. So I think it's important to like allow people to have space to have those conversations.
Yeah, you talk about like the saying, boys will be boys quite a lot, because that can be such a damaging thing to say. It's like letting boys get away with a lot.
We only ever say it when boys are doing bad stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like you're never like, oh, he got an A in a spelling test. Boys will be boys. You're always like, oh, he's punched someone in the face. Boys will be boys. Or like, oh, he's like stolen something from the shop. Oh, don't worry about it. Boys will be boys. I feel like there are expectations that we have of boys very, very gendered expectations that they will just be worse. Like, do you know what I mean? It is bad, but it's also super normal. Like, you expect boys to fight. You expect them to, like, if you have 2 little boys, you're living with the expectation that they're gonna be like rough and tumble and like punch each other in the eye and like steal stuff from each other. Whereas if you have 2 little girls and they do that, you police it quick. Do you know what I mean? You'll be like, we don't do that. That's not nice. Be nice.
But you've got the flip side where, you know, a lot of people feel more comfortable if they've got a boy, you know, going off and having sex, and they feel more safe with that. But then if you've got a girl, if you've got a daughter, then it's like, oh my goodness, there's the the pregnancy.
But like, sex is like inherently more dangerous for women, right? Like, I feel like there's more consequences, and there's like expectation that boys will just be naughty or just do things that they know they're not supposed to do. And I think that's also applied with adult men to sex. So like, there is an expectation that like, if you engage in that way with an adult man, like there is a chance that like something off kilter might happen. And then when you look at like, super heavy, but when you look at like sexual violence statistics, it's not that it's all men who are doing it, but the majority of those things or the majority of the acts are committed by men, which I guess just makes people feel unsafe.
Statistics are less in favour of men.
Yeah.
So what are these male stereotypes?
Oh, it's a good question.
It's like angry, dominant,
violent.
Yeah.
I'm going for the worst one.
Like smelly.
Yeah. Strong is one.
Wife beater is literally like a name.
Okay, this is
Athletic.
Athletic is definitely one.
Big old dick.
Well, I feel like that is part of it, right? Like, it's a stereotype obviously not everyone can live up to, but like, it definitely exists in the ether of what you should be.
Wanting to have sex all the time.
Never saying no. Also having no emotions. Having emotions, but the emotions are just happiness and anger.
Yeah, like, and if they're sad, it's like, shocking.
It's like happy about football or angry about the world.
And being the breadwinner, the money maker.
Provider.
But why are all these things really damaging?
Well, some of them are not necessarily inherently damaging. Like, being athletic is not bad. Being strong is not a bad thing. Where possible, everyone should be as strong as they can be, right? I think they're damaging when they're like pushed to the limit. And I think often that's linked to like conversations that we don't often have around power. So like, if you take masculinity and you add power to it, which is like the structure or the system that we live in, like where men are prioritized, then those things that can be really good and really healthy then get tainted a little bit or like corrupted and then become like really damaging. And like strength becomes like, rather than it being like, oh, it's good for me to be as strong as I can be, it then becomes, I'm not allowed to be weak. And when there's like a limitation on what you can and can't be, I think that's when it gets a little bit scary.
Why as humans do we not like fitting to these stereotypes? You find a girl who might be, I don't know, quite tomboyish and like sports, and then we find a guy who may be quite into fashion. Why are we not comfortable with that?
It's a good question. Why aren't we comfortable with it? Well, I guess to a certain extent we are in some ways, because there are always people who live outside of the norms. Do you know what I mean? There's always people who are on the margins. There have been for all of time. It's just that those people will have a harder life than the people who can fit within what's expected of them. Like, there's a lot of pressure. If you look at like media and advertising, or even parenting, like what you're expected to be and expected to do from a very young age is very clear. So to like deviate from that is like it's a really brave decision. Do you know what I mean? Like, when I was young, I grew up with 3 older sisters. So like, I used to play with like Action Man, but I also used to play with Barbies because there were Barbies in the house. But like, when my friends came over, I knew it was time to hide the Barbies. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I feel like so many of us have those experiences. Do you know what I mean? And they're not necessarily things that you remember, but they're just like little comments of like, you shouldn't be doing that, or don't like, we don't do that, we're boys, or whatever. And they're so like programmed and ingrained in the way that you think, so you just never, when you're older, you would never deviate. Do you know what I mean?
How do the kids react in the exercises that you do with them in school?
Kids are wild. Kids are wild. They're so fun. Like, we do an activity called a word race. And what that is like, we give them, so we set it up, we're like, have you played word association before? And everyone's like, yeah, we know what that is. And then we're like, okay, cool. So we're gonna do word association, but to a topic, not to the last word. So they run to the board and write down a word that they associate with any topic we give them. So the first one is usually something like breakfast or superheroes or whatever. And they write down as many words as they can. The team with the most words wins. And then we do men, and then we do women. and is super, super interested because for them, like we've already done like an agreement of how we're gonna be in the space and like what this is gonna be like. And we're not teachers, we're not here, you're not gonna get in trouble, you can say what you want. And they just wanna like push the limits. So they just wanna test like, you just wanna test how much you can get away with. I know what you're on. So they say the worst stuff, basically 1,000 different words for like penis or vagina, like as many ways that they can say that as they can think of.
Yeah. Right.
And then like some stereotypes come out, so it's like strong or abs or like six pack or whatever for men.
Yeah.
And then for women it's like kitchen or cooking or mother or care or baby. I guess for kids, they spend so much time being told what they're not allowed to do or how they're not allowed to speak or what they're not allowed to think. When you give them the space to like just be honest, they will be as honest as you can handle. Do you know what I mean? So it's super wild. But then once you've got that out, like you can then talk about what the stereotypes are and where they come from.
What happened in your life to make you sort of question masculinity?
Oh, it's a long story. Do you have time? Okay, cool.
Say it in 5 words.
Okay, it's super interesting. Long story short, I grew up in a religious family and I decided when I was a teenager that I wanted to like work in church and I wanted to go into full-time ministry. So I went to Bible college and I did my degree in theology and then I got kicked out because I had sex, which was super awkward. I had to tell my mum. It wasn't a great experience. And then
awful.
I had this plan of what I was going to do and now I don't know, but I'd always wanted to work with kids. So then I went to an organisation that was teaching sex education in secondary schools, which was really cool. So I did that for a couple of years. And one of my jobs there was to develop a boys project about being a good man. And so I got the job and I was like, this is easy, don't worry about it. And then I sat down on my first day and I was like, like, what do you say? How do you tell boys that they should be good people?
Yeah, how do you become a good man?
I had no idea. So I started researching all these organisations that were doing the same kind of work. And most people were like, it's about rites of passage, like take boys into the woods and make them chop down trees.
Oh my goodness.
Like teach them how to build houses and they'll get in touch with their masculinity. And I just have pretty hands, so I was like, I'm definitely not doing that. Like that is long for me. Do you know, I grew up with 3 sisters, like I wasn't interested. But it was like a really long journey, and I think like loads of people have like these light bulb moments where they're like, this is the truth. For me, it was just a very gradual process of like shifting like my worldview a little bit and like thinking about things in a different way.
Yeah, and people just want to up their count.
Yeah.
Numbers are a thing.
Yeah. Can I talk about Love Island? I feel like if we just put someone on Love Island who didn't have a body count of like 200, do you know what I mean? Like it might change the narrative a little bit. Or like if that wasn't like super normalised for that to be the goal, like that to be like the pinnacle of masculinity, like, oh, you've had sex with 100 people, well done.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it having all the sexual partners makes you a better man?
Yeah.
Like a sexual god.
Yeah. When actually, like if you've had sex with 100 people and all of those sexual experiences were trash, is that better than having one good sexual experience with the same person? Do you know what I mean? Like maybe we need to like shift the goalposts a little bit and rethink the way that we think about it.
Why is there pressure?
Why is there pressure to have sex with lots of people?
Yeah.
I think it's like, in a weird way, that's meant to show experience or like prowess or like skill. And actually, it doesn't evidence any of those things. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just you've had sex with loads of people. And it doesn't mean that any of them enjoyed it. It doesn't mean that you even enjoyed it. And I think, there's a lot of pressure to like prove yourself in that way, when actually you should probably be having good sex. And that's something guys don't talk about ever as well, like is having good sex, like having a good, healthy sexual encounter. We just recreate the same stuff that we've seen in porn, right? Like we see it and we think, oh, that's what sex is. So many people learn about sex from watching porn.
Not just men, women as well. We do exactly the same thing. You know, being brought up thinking that we want big, muscular, massive men, and that's just not the case.
And if you can like smash it out, like for an extended period of time, then you've done a really good job. But like that's super uncomfortable. Like in real life, that's not always the greatest thing. And I think what porn doesn't teach, and porn is not like all bad, unless you're 14 years old. You have to be of age to watch porn. But porn is not always bad, right? Like there are some really good messages in there. But one thing that's often skipped is like the negotiation phase that always happens at the beginning of sex. Where you're like, what do you like? What do you enjoy? What makes you feel good? How do we do this in a way that makes both of us feel like we're having a good time? And if we can get back to like that conversation where the goal is like to make sure everybody's having a good time, then sex will be much better.
So why do guys find it so hard to talk about their feelings and actually talk and communicate?
Do you know what? Because it is hard. One, like, I feel like it's a learnt skill that we are never taught. That like, if you're a boy who grows up with sisters, your sisters still get told, oh, come here and tell me how you're feeling, and you get told to stop crying. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
boys
you
don't cry.
Yeah, you don't learn those skills of like how to express what you're feeling, and like the acceptable expressions are anger and happiness. And so sometimes like there's really complex feelings that are like a mixture of like embarrassment and frustration and shyness or whatever, but it just comes out as anger. I don't know if you guys know, but like suicide is like the leading killer of men under the age of 49 now in the UK. Yeah. And my suspicion is that that's quite linked to like men not being able to express how they feel.
It's a lot higher than women.
Right, yeah.
Because we have a support network and we've been brought up knowing that we can talk about our problems.
Yeah. So I think if we can learn to talk about how we're feeling, it will just be better for everyone. It will be better for us, do you know what I mean? Like if we can learn to express ourselves, which is hard, it's not that easy. We do an activity in workshops where we're like, oh, sit in a circle, and I just call it circle time. We go around and everybody has to give a word for how they're feeling, and they can't say fine, good, calm, hungry, tired. And it's really hard, like to actually check in with yourself and think about how you're feeling. I'd encourage you guys to just think about how you're feeling and learn the words for like to describe that feeling.
And it's okay to seek help as well. I think that's what guys struggle with a lot. Is like it's okay not to do it by yourself. You can support each other. You can help each other and like get help from like a therapist, say. Yeah,
we don't have to be a lone ranger. Honestly, going to a therapist was one of the best things that I've ever done. And it wasn't necessarily because like I had mad issues, do you know what I mean? It wasn't necessarily because I was feeling like I wanted to do something really bad to myself. Like it was just like, oh, I've got some stuff that I'm struggling to figure out. How do I do that? Maybe this person who's trained and is a professional can help. Using those services is always a good thing to do, and it can only benefit you to like access them and to help yourself be the better version of yourself.
Do you have 3 top tips on how we can get rid of toxic masculinity?
Yeah, 3 top tips on how we can get rid of it is hard. 3 top tips on how we can start to change it is super easy. And I think I would say number 1 is learn to be free, which sounds super ambiguous, but I think basically there's like a narrative that's been set for us. There's a pathway that we're told we have to walk down, and we don't have to walk down that pathway. We can express ourselves however we want. It doesn't have to be that boys wear pink and girls wear blue. Do you know what I mean? Like you can express yourself however you want, and there's so much freedom in doing that. Again, that doesn't mean that you have to be the opposite of what people are telling you to be. You might want to be that thing, but just try and be what you want to be. I would say the second one is learn to talk about your feelings. It can be really hard, it can be really uncomfortable, but if we can learn to talk about our feelings, then that makes it much easier to communicate what we want or what we desire in the world, and for other people to understand us. And I think the third one would be learn to talk about sex in particular. Like learn to have conversations about it, learn to like deal with the awkwardness of it, and talk to your friends, talk to your parents about it, talk to anybody that will listen about like sex and what you think it's gonna be like, or what you think it's like, or what you wish it could be. Because if you're able to communicate that, then it gets better.
And it will.
Yeah.
If we all start talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for coming, guys.